This is the second half of the lecture with PowerPoint slides on Exodus. This one deals with wilderness wanderings in the book of Exodus, the covenant at Sinai, and the giving of the law. First, let's talk about the wilderness wanderings in the end of chapter 15 through chapter 17 of the book of Exodus. God sustains Israel in the wilderness and provides for Israel's needs in spite of their complaining. First, in Exodus 15, verses 22 through 25, the people are said to complain, and then the Lord provides them water because they didn't have any water to drink. In chapter 16, the people complain because they don't have food, and so they think they're going to die in the wilderness, and the Lord provides for them quail and manna. Manna is small, sweet wafers that they found on the ground every morning that sustained them in the wilderness. In chapter 17, the people complain and contend. The word contend in Hebrew really means to bring a legal suit against. And so they bring suit against Moses, and then God provides them water from the rock. In chapter 17, the people of Israel go to war against a desert-dwelling nomadic people known as the Amalekites. And they were successful in battle against them so long as Moses' arms managed to hold up his mighty staff. Then in chapter 19, the people agree to be the holy people of God. In the book of Numbers, chapters 10 through about 25, we have Wilderness Wanderings Part 2, where almost exactly the same things happen. The people complain because they don't have water, they complain because they don't have food, they rebel against Moses' authority, and they have battles with Canaanite inhabitants. But they're unsuccessful in battle, and the Lord punishes them for all of these complaints of theirs and their rebellion. Though Numbers, much of the book of Numbers and Exodus chapters 16 through 18 are very similar to each other, why is it that God is patient with them and provides in Exodus, but punishes them in the book of Numbers? I think the difference is that in between these two episodes is the covenant and the laws given at Sinai. The people agreed to be the holy people of God in Exodus 19 and 24. So that in Numbers, when they rebel, when they complain, it is refusal and rebellion, and so that is why they're punished. The next part of the book of Exodus deals with the covenant, the giving of the covenant at Sinai and the giving of the law. And this really has to do with what it means to be the covenant people of God. God provides a covenant, an agreement to be their God and provide for them if they will be His faithful people. And so even the laws here are subsets of the covenant. The covenant relationship comes first. The laws are simply given to be boundaries or borders of the covenant beyond which they transgress if they go beyond. In chapter 19, Moses is God's messenger of the covenant. He's given the message to give to the people to prepare them for receiving the covenant, and the covenant that's going to be given is a conditional one. God gives righteous and faithful covenant conditioned upon the people's faithful keeping of the covenant stipulations, that is, the Ten Commandments and the other laws of the covenant code in chapters 21 through 23. God heard the voice of the people when they cried out in chapter 2, but from then on, to be God's people requires that they obey the covenant stipulations. In chapter 19, God descends on the mountain, the holy mountain of Sinai or Horeb, in this fiery, cloudy pillar. We had an inkling of this way back in chapter 2 of the book of Exodus, when at the mountain of God, Moses saw the bush burning, God speaking out of the midst of the burning bush that was not consumed. That is a foreshadowing of the events of Sinai in chapter 19 and following. We call this a theophany in chapter 19. In fact, it is the great theophany in the Old Testament. Theophany simply means a divine appearance of God, usually in the storm. And so sometimes it's called the storm theophany. That is, God's appearance in the thick black cloud with thunder and lightning and fire and earthquake and trumpet blast. Chapters 20 through 24 or 25 uses a formula that we call the suzerainty covenant. That is, covenants in the ancient world had a particular form to them, whether among the Hittites of Turkey or the Assyrians or Babylonians of the ancient Near East and Mesopotamia, or of other cultures of Syria or Canaan. The suzerainty covenant is given by a great king to his people or to lesser kings. And it had 6 or 7 parts. Really, a 6-part suzerainty covenant is an agreement between this great king with his people, and there's 6 parts followed by a 7th part, which is a covenant sacrifice. These 6 parts are the preamble or introduction, where the king identifies himself, and in fact God does the same thing. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Chapter 20, verse 2. In ancient Near Eastern suzerainty covenants, the king will often tell how he had saved a particular people from something terrible, from marauding bands of Arabs or from other armies of other nations, or he had somehow saved them, and therefore they were to obey the stipulations of the covenant. So the historical recounting of the king's help is also mirrored in Exodus 20, where God says, I brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Ancient Near Eastern covenants also called on the gods as witnesses to the covenant. In chapter 20, verse 2, there are no other gods. They are to have no other gods before the Lord their God, before Yahweh. But we do have something in Deuteronomy, not in Exodus, but in Deuteronomy, the second giving of the law, where Moses calls upon heaven and earth to act upon as witnesses. So though there are no other gods to be witnesses to the covenant, every covenant has witnesses. the covenant at Sinai also, heaven and earth, all of creation are called upon to witness, to be witnesses to the covenant. All ancient Near Eastern covenants have stipulations, that is, particular laws or requirements that the king binds the people to do. Because I saved you against the marauding bands of Arabs, therefore, here is what I expect from you. And there are also covenant stipulations in Exodus and Deuteronomy. In chapter 20, verses 3 through 17, the Ten Commandments. In chapters 21 through 23, the covenant law code, a whole bunch of case laws dealing with, for instances, examples of how the Ten Commandments are played out in real life. And so the book of Exodus, as well as Deuteronomy, also possesses these covenant stipulations. Ancient Near Eastern covenants also had blessings and curses. Blessings for compliance and obedience to the covenant stipulations, curses for those who did not keep the stipulations. In chapter 23, verses 20 through 33, we also have blessings and curses. In the book of Deuteronomy, we have two whole chapters, chapters 27 and 28, that are the blessings and curses of the covenant. Ancient Near Eastern covenants also, the ancient king made provision for how to safeguard the covenant, the written form of the covenant. How would that be safeguarded? Well, it would be kept safe in a particular place and then read periodically to refresh people's memory. In the Old Testament, the safeguarding of the covenant was the Ark of the Covenant, wherein was the two tablets of the Ten Commandments, in chapter 25. Then all ancient covenants were ratified by sacrifice, and that is also the case in the book of Exodus, chapter 24. Many bulls are sacrificed. Half of the blood is thrown against the mountain, the other half is thrown on the people, and the covenant is ratified. There are many such covenants in the ancient Near East, too many to recount here, but Assyria in particular has many such suzerainty covenants that can be compared beneficially for this particular form of the covenant. This is a picture of the suzerainty covenant of Esarhaddon from the 600s BC. Chapters 20 through 24 deal with the laws. Chapter 20, I've already mentioned, the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are what we refer to as apodictic law. Apodictic law is laws without stated penalties. They are simply unthinkable for covenant people. Do not do these things, for they are contrary to the covenant with the Lord. But without stated prohibitions, without stated, consequences. Absolute prohibitions without stated consequences. In chapters 21 through 23, we have a whole series of case laws, and that is sometimes called if-then laws, and that is, if someone or when someone does something, breaking a law, then this is the penalty. And so these are concrete applications of the Ten Commandments. What does it mean to steal? Well, if someone takes someone else's goat, then they must pay an indemnity and pay a fine. Now, all laws, whether in the Ten Commandments or in the Covenant Law Code of chapters 21 through 23, or other law codes in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, all of them can more or less be broken down in two categories, and that is love of God and love of neighbor. And so one does not act in such a way as to demean one's respect and love for God, the first 4 commandments of the 10, nor of the near or far neighbor, and that is laws pertaining to the neighbor, which are commandments 5 through 10 of the 10 commandments, hence the 2 tablets of the law. Chapters 25 through 31 deals with cultic holiness. This deals with the creation of the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle and other holy objects that they will carry about in the wilderness that will end up with them in the promised land. This organization of holiness and worship is like a new 7-day creation, chapter 24, 15 through 18. God speaks on the 7th day of that. And also in chapter 31, God's last words deal with Sabbath and creation. If we look back at Genesis chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2, the first creation account in Genesis, it ends with the giving of the Sabbath and God blessing the Sabbath and setting it apart. Well, these furnishings are going to be dealing with worship and how one draws near to a holy God in the Old Testament. The most holy object is the Ark of the Covenant. The ark was a cedar wood box covered with gold with a couple of winged lion sphinxes, that is cherubim, on the cover that contained the tablets of the law, the 10 Commandments, also a jar of manna and Aaron's rod that budded. Difficult to know whether those were inside the ark or laid alongside the ark. Other furnishings for the tabernacle: the table of showbread, sometimes called the table of the presence, where flat cakes were baked and placed on the table of showbread each day. Also the 7-branched lampstand, which at least later came to signify prayers. The tabernacle itself, separated into 2 sections, the holy place and the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could go in 1 time a year. In front of that tabernacle was the large bronze altar where sacrifices were done. Now the sacrifices, all sacrifice is intended for atonement, and so the atoning sacrifices were done on the bronze altar in front of the tabernacle. An incense altar, also symbolizing prayer, in the tabernacle, and a bronze basin for purification of the priests. Other objects, anointing oil and incense that were offered up on the incense altar, etc. And then finally, the setting aside of the day of the Sabbath as a holy day. Now, it's difficult to know whether sacrifices were originally offered on the Sabbath, but this came to be an important sacrifice day, and so the Sabbath sacrifices in the course of time became very, very important objects of or times of worship. And so Sabbath became not only a day of rest in the course of time, but also a day of worship. Chapters 32 through 34 deal with the broken covenant. That is, Moses is so long up on the mountain that the people become very, very impatient and antsy, and so demand to know, who is this God that brought us out of Egypt? Moses, we don't know what's happened to him. He may never come back down. And so Aaron took their jewelry and created a golden calf image that he says, this is the God that brought you out of the land of Egypt. God determines, when this happens, to annihilate them and make of Moses a great nation. But Moses reminds God of the promises that he made to the fathers, and finally God relents, and he does not destroy them. But Moses does shatter the tablets of the Ten Commandments, which will then need to be remade later on in the book. Aaron gave an excuse. He said, well, I threw the jewelry in there and out popped this golden calf. Then God says, just go on, leave, but I won't go with you. But Moses intercedes and God relents again. God will go up with the people. God then shows himself to Moses. Moses requests that he be allowed to see God. God allows him to see his back, whatever that means, and gave again the Ten Commandments. Moses came down from the mountain, and his face was shiny. The Hebrew text said he had horns. But in antiquity, the word keren, horn, also means shiny. But in the Middle Ages, it was thought that Moses came down from the mountain having grown horns. And so in Michelangelo's Moses, you see horns sprouting from his head. A misreading of the text. Chapters 35 through 40 deal with the actual construction of the tabernacle and God's presence, deals with the building of all the sanctuary and all the furnishings, the building of the ark. And then in chapter 40, God's presence fills the tabernacle. His fiery, cloudy pillar comes and fills the tabernacle with his holy presence, which is exactly also what happens in 1 Kings 8 when the Temple of Solomon is built and consecrated.